want to talk about this skull. So the skull is part of the axial skeleton, and we're going to talk about the bones as well as the features of the skull. So right here is your frontal bone. So this is your frontal bone right here. Here is the coronal suture right here, which separates the frontal bone right here from the parietal bones. So here's the right parietal bone and here's the left parietal bone. And right here we can see the frontal bone here, and we can see the coronal suture here, and you can see the sagittal suture which separates the parietal bones. So here is the right and left parietal bone, and here's the sagittal suture, and here's the coronal suture. This right here is a exploded skull where the flat bones of the skull have been disarticulated at the sutures. And on the frontal bone we have a feature. The structure that the probe is pointing to is the supraorbital foramen, and this is the notch right here. On the other side we see the supraorbital foramen, and this is the notch. We have the parietal bone next, which I've already showed you. So here is the right parietal bone, and here is the left parietal bone. And remember that you have your coronal suture and sagittal suture right here. Parietal bone, frontal bone. We have the temporal bone next. Let me show you this. So here's the temporal bone right here on this exploded skull here. So remember, frontal bone, parietal bone, and temporal bone. And we have a feature on the temporal bone, and this structure right here is called the zygomatic process right here. And the zygomatic process is going to articulate with this bone right here, and this is the zygomatic bone, and that's your zygomatic process. Let me show you this here. So if you look right here, you can pretty much see the temporal bone here, and we have another suture here which I forgot to show you on the other skull, and this suture right here is called the squamous suture. This is the squamous suture right here, and right here we can see the temporal bone, and this is your zygomatic process right here, and this bone right here is the zygomatic bone. Now this skull right here is showing you the skull from the inferior side, and we can see in this area right here we have a structure called the mandibular fossa right here, as well as right here. Here's the mandibular fossa right here, and right here. Now, the mandible is going to fit right into this mandibular fossa. So here's the mandibular fossa right here that the probe is pointing to. See that? Here's the mandibular fossa right here. And right here we have the condylar process of the mandible, or mandibular condyle of the mandible, which is going to articulate right there. This is going to form the TMJ, the temporal mandibular joint, which is a synovial joint. So right here we have the mandibular fossa, and right here we have the mandibular fossa here, and right here mandibular fossa from this view, this lateral view here, and we have the mandibular condyle right here, which is going to articulate, form a synovial joint, and this is a diaphragmatic joint, freely movable, forms the TMJ. I want to show you some more things here. Mastoid process. Mastoid process is right here. Here's your mastoid process right here. So we've done three things already for the temporal bone. What is this structure here? You should know this structure as a zygomatic process. This is the zygomatic bone. Zygomatic process. What is this structure right here of your temporal bone? Mandibular fossa. And this structure right here is your what? Mastoid process. We have the styloid process next. Now, if you look right here, we can see on this skull here, this is a fake skull here, but it's the best one in the lab. This right here is a real skull. This right here is a fake skull. And this right here is a real skull right here. So, right here, again, zygomatic process. This right here is showing you the mandibular fossa. It's got a piece of rubber here to resemble the joint. So this is the mandibular fossa, and this is your mastoid process. Now this structure right here is the styloid process. The styloid process. Can you see that? Hopefully you can. The styloid process. And we have what's next? The stylomastoid foramen. Now, let me show it to you on this one. Now right here, I don't know if you can see this or not. I'm going to try to make it clearer for you. So right here is your mandibular fossa here. This right here is your styloid process, which we've already been over. This right here is your mastoid process. There's a foramen right here, which is where the probe is sticking in. This foramen right here is the stylomastoid foramen. Stylomastoid foramen. Hopefully you see that. Stylomastoid foramen. So mastoid process, stylomastoid foramen, and styloid process. Let me show you that on this skull here. So again, we have the mastoid process right here. This right here is your styloid process right here. And this right here, in between the mastoid process and your styloid process right here, that's your stylomastoid foramen. Okay. Now, I want to talk about two more foramina. We have the jugular foramen right here. And then right here, this is the carotid canal. So jugular foramen here, and then your carotid canal. Let me show it to you on this one, which is a little bit more clear. So right here, we have the jugular foramen, and right here we have the carotid canal. So we have three of them. What is this right here? Stylomastoid foramen. What is this right here? The jugular foramen. What is this right here? The carotid canal. What is this structure here? The mastoid process, styloid process, mandibular fossa right here, and then your zygomatic process here and here, your mandibular fossa here, styloid process, and the mastoid process. Okay, last item on the list here is external auditory meatus, or the external acoustic meatus right here. External acoustic meatus or external auditory meatus. And you can see it right here as well. Right there. And on this one, we can see it right here. Styloid process, mastoid process, external auditory meatus. Okay, let's continue with the sphenoid bone. So, let me put this skull back together here. So let me show you this real quick. Now, we have the zygomatic bone right here. This is the frontal bone. This is the parietal bone. This is the temporal bone. This bone right here, this bone right here is the sphenoid bone. And you can see it on the other side as well. Here's the sphenoid bone again. And here you have the frontal bone, parietal bone, and temporal bone. Sphenoid bone. Now let's open up the skull here. And here we see the sphenoid bone. It's a bat wing looking bone. So it's a bat wing looking bone here. So we have the greater wing right here and the lesser wing. Greater wing and lesser wing. Greater wing, lesser wing. And let's look at the features here. This structure here, which looks like a cradle, that's called the sella turcica. The sella turcica is right here. Looks like a cradle. This is where the pituitary gland sits, the sella turcica. And then we have the optic foramina or canals right here and right here. Okay, now we have the superior orbital fissure. That's sort of tricky to look at, so let me show you this. So right here we can see, right here we can see the superior orbital fissure on this side. We see the superior, the superior orbital fissure right here. And we can see the optic canal or foramen here and here where the optic nerves go through. And then these little slits here, superior orbital fissure, superior orbital fissure. Now, if you look here, from this angle here, we can see the superior orbital fissure right here. And this is the superior orbital fissure. And this right here would be the greater wing here, and then the greater wing here. This structure right here would be the inferior orbital fissure, and inferior orbital fissure here on this side. So superior orbital fissure, inferior orbital fissure, superior orbital fissure, and inferior orbital fissure. Okay, let's continue. We have, what's next? The foraminal valley. Oh, I skipped one. So these next four are pretty easy to ID if you can get the layout here. And it's pretty easy when you look at it like this. So right here we have the superior orbital fissure. We have this hole right here. This is the foramen rotundum right here. Foramen rotundum. So this is your optic canal here. This is your optic canal right here. This is your superior orbital fissure, foramen rotundum. Okay, now what's next? We have the foraminal valley. And what's next? Foramen lacerum. And then this little foramen right here is called the foramen spinosum. So let me just go over those one more time here. So right here, this is the optic canal. This is the superior orbital fissure. This right here is the foramen rotundum. Okay. And this right here is your foramen ovale. And this right here is the foramen lacerum. And that's a sella turcica right there. And on this side, you can see the superior orbital fissure again. This right here is the foramen rotundum again. And this right here is the foramen ovale, foramen lacerum. And this right here is your foramen spinosum. So, foramen rotundum, foramen ovale, and this right here is your foramen lacerum and spinosum. Okay, let's look at the occipital bone. The occipital bone is going to be this structure right here. Let me show you this on this model here, on this skull here, excuse me. So here is the occipital bone from the posterior view here, occipital bone. Now we can see the two parietal bones right here and right here, and then we have the sagittal suture, and then this is the occipital bone. Now this suture right here is called the lambdoidal suture. Lambdoidal suture. So let me put this skull back together here. So, well, I apologize. Let me get down here. So right here, you can pretty much see the same thing. So we have the occipital bone here, the parietal bones here and here, sagittal suture and lambdoid suture. Okay, let's look at some features here. I want to show you the foramen magnum here. So here is the foramen magnum right here. This is where the spinal cord goes through. And we have the hypoglossal canal. Let me turn this over where I can show you. So this is the foramen magnum again here. And then here we have the hypoglossal canal over here. And here we have the hypoglossal canal again here. And here. So foramen magnum, and this is your hypoglossal canal, and this is your hypoglossal canal. And this right here is the jugular foramen and jugular foramen. I've already showed you that one. So jugular foramen here and jugular foramen. See? And let me show you these as well. So remember, I showed you the foramen rotundum the foramen ovale and the foramen lacerum and the spinosum from this angle. So let me show you the ovale from the inferior view. So here is the foramen ovale right here from the inferior view here. And let me show you the foramen lacerum from the inferior view. So here is the foramen lacerum here. We flip it over. And here is the foramen lacerum as well. And I think that's about it for that. I want to show you some more features as well for the occipital bone. So we have the external occipital protuberance. That's this structure right here. And then here you have the superior and inferior nuchal lines. Right here and right here. And we have the occipital condyles here and here. Here and here. What is this structure here? That is your foramen magnum, where the brain stem and the spinal cord goes through. Spinal cord goes through this. And then we have what? This is the jugular foramen. This right here is your carotid canal, foramen lacerum, foramen ovale, mandibular fossa, stylomastoid foramen, stylomastoid foramen. And we have the hypoglossal canal right here, as well as right here, hypoglossal canal, and we can see it right here, as well as right here, hypoglossal canal. Now these structures here, like I've already mentioned those, occipital condyles here and here. Now I'll show you this later. So right here we have the first cervical vertebrae. This is called the atlas bone. Now we have the superior articular facets right here. And right here. And those are going to articulate right here. And when you think about that, that's going to be associated with nod and yes. So these superior articular facets right here are going to articulate with the occipital condyles. Now I want to show you some structures of the ethmoid bone. So here we have the cranial vault again. Remember, this is the sphenoid bone. Greater wing, lesser wing. Okay. So we have the ethmoid bone right here. The ethmoid bone is going to be a smaller bone and more of an internal bone. And let me show it to you over here as well. So this is the real skull here. Showing you the ethmoid bone from the cranial vault. This is the fake skull.